Thanks for tuning in to more NFL Draft Talk on the Ourlads Football Network as we talk Atlanta Falcons football with Kevin Knight. He is with the Falcoholic at thefalcoholic.com, at sbnation.com. And Kevin, good to talk Atlanta Falcons football with you again.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me back.
Hey, it's a perfect time to talk to you too, Kevin, because there's a lot going on. Not draft news, but
No,
there's a
it's
lot.
OTAs, right? Yeah.
Yeah, it's not it. Julio Jones. I'll tell you what. Let's talk about that first, because there might be a lot of people tuning in. Oh, Atlanta news. It must be about Julio. So let's talk Julio first, and then we'll get into the Falcons draft and also about their 20. That's right, 20 signings after the draft of rookie free agents. So we're not going to talk all 20, but I just figured I'd mention that. All right, Julio Jones. This was something obviously we talked about before the draft, and you pinpointed June 1st, which happens to be tomorrow, about if Julio was going to get traded. There was no way he was going to get traded before June 1st. It was still going to be hard for him to get traded financially June 1st or later. But what are you thinking right now?
Yeah, I mean, it does seem that a trade is inevitable, sadly, for a lot of Falcons fans. The other details of the trade are pretty much up in the air. I mean, we don't know what the compensation will be. We don't really know what teams are interested in other than just speculation, I think, is what we're seeing, on Twitter. But, um, ESPN reported that the Falcons, quote unquote, had an offer for a future first round pick on the table. I don't know if that's true or not, but I do believe that is what they will be asking for. And I don't think they're going to come off of that asking price. And I think they would be willing to wait until the end of training camp, or perhaps even longer if they don't get an offer that they believe is worthy of Julio Jones. They're not just going to trade him for cap space, because they have lots of other options to clear the cap they need for the draft class. They have several other things they can do, so they don't have to force the Julio Jones trades immediately. So I think they're asking for a first round pick. They may be willing to consider like a second and a good player. Like, I know one of the popular mock trades out there is a second and cornerback J.C. Jackson from the Patriots. A good player and a second rounder may be able to get it done if they don't get the first that they're looking for. But ultimately, I think they want the first round pick and are looking less at the players, because it is mostly a salary cap move from the team's perspective. They need the space, to give them the flexibility to sign a few more veterans. Like you said, they had to sign 20 undrafted free agents to fill out their 90-man rosters. So there's definitely room for a few more veterans in the building.
I hope so.
So, trading Julio Jones, I think it's like 12 million or so after June 1st in terms of cap savings this year. So they only need about 7 to 8 million net to sign the draft class. So with that in mind, they could use the remainder of that to sign a few more choice veterans as well. Okay. So we'll see if it happens immediately. If it's true that they have an offer for a first round pick on the table right now, as ESPN reported, then I think that they will probably just do it. But if they don't have an offer I think that they will wait. So it could drag out into training camp even. So.
And you said 12 million they'll save.
Yeah,
what will they
I can
be
get the exact
losing,
numbers for you,
approximately?
Yeah. Let me pull it up real quick. But yeah, I think they save a lot this year. Obviously, there's a lot of dead cap, but with the post June 1st designation, it splits the dead cap over time. So let me pull it up here just to make sure, because. So yeah, it's this year if it's a post June 1st cut. Well, they can't do a post June 1st cut, obviously, but the trade changes things because you offload the base salary, which is guaranteed this year. So yeah, they will save. Actually, it's 15.3 million this year, with 7.75 million dead cap, and that dead cap continues, over the next couple of years of his previous deal. So I think they only actually save, I think, a net of like almost 4 million next year, because they have to pay the rest of his prorated bonus next year. But it definitely creates a lot of space this year, and they could theoretically keep some of that space in their coffers to kind of offset next year, roll it over.
Sure. Well, I mean, it's just the name of the game that's being played today. And 3 or 4 years ago, you would never see this happen. But it's just the way, I don't know who the first owner it was that did it, that ate up all this money. But
Mhm.
whoever did it started the dominoes, and now, you know what? If we lose 10 million, 15 million, 20 million, that's okay. You know, because we're gonna still save X amount of million for our cap, and so it is what it is. And look, I think that's a good thing for fans because that means that even though I know there are a lot of fans that aren't into free agency, and I think there's an extent of free agency that I'm okay with. There is, like, I'm a Washington National fan, so do I like it that the Nationals offer Anthony Rendon 300 million, and he goes, no, I have to take the $350 million deal. So there's things that you don't like about free agency,
Right.
but in general, it makes it a lot more fun, and things like this happen. It's not good for Atlanta necessarily, for the fans, I should say, but whoever gets Julio Jones, that fan base would be pretty stoked.
Yeah, yeah, and we probably wouldn't be having this conversation if it wasn't for COVID, because with the cap dropping, that 10 million plus drop that happened would have been enough, more than enough, for the Falcons to sign their draft class and all this. So, the fact that the cap did fall for the first time in, I guess, basically history, is
Yeah.
a big reason that they had to consider a move like this in the first place.
Okay. Well, there you go. So, and any guesses at all, or not really, as far as where he'll go?
I mean, right now, I think the Patriots can offer the most compelling package because they have the cap space they need to trade for Julio Jones to take on his whole base salary. They have players they want to trade that the Falcons might be interested in, like J.C. Jackson.
Yeah.
It's rumored that they have been interested in trading him, and they have their first round pick. So that's a big deal. A lot of these teams that are rumored, like the Chiefs and teams like that, they don't
That's
have
true.
a first round pick next year, so it's going to be hard for them to make as competitive an offer if teams start coming in with first round picks. So we'll see who it ultimately is, but my money, I guess, would be on the Patriots based
Okay.
on what we've heard so far.
Yeah, that'd be interesting.
I mean, I would hate it, but I would like the first round pick in J.C. Jackson. I would hate that
Yeah.
Julio's going to the Patriots, but
Oh, and I wouldn't like that either, being a Jet fan.
Yeah.
So I'm not
Yeah,
interested in that move. Okay, so let's get to the draft now for the Falcons. And look, and before we do that, I just want to remind everybody that, because let's see, there you got the 5. There were 9 draft picks.
Mhm.
And between the 9 draft picks, I believe there were also 2, 3, 4 undrafted free agents that were also signed, that were profiled here in the 2021 Ourlads draft guide. So if you this is still a perfect time to purchase the draft guide, because not only do you get to read about all of the draft picks, but you get to read about some of those undrafted rookie free agents, find out what they're all about. And then this is also a really good time to keep in mind that the 2021 draft review guide will be out in about a month. And the Atlanta Falcons are one of the teams that I'm responsible for writing about in the draft review guide. So another reason I'm glad that this is the perfect time for me to get to talk to you, Kevin. And just, keep in mind you'll be helping me out when I write this report. Okay, so let's get right to it. And you know what? I like the draft. Just from an overall perspective, I think there were some key players that the Falcons got grade-wise, which worked out really well, whether it was Mayfield, who could have been a late first-rounder to get him in the 3rd. Same thing later in the draft when you're talking about even Darby, he was a 4th-round graded receiver to get him in the 6th. And a few other players that we're going to talk about, and especially when you lead off with Kyle Pitts.
Yeah.
This was not where you thought they were going to go, even though you thought quarterback or Pitts. And I know you were high on Lance. Lance, correct? That's who you were
I
high
was
on the
more of a
most?
Fields guy, but I think
Fields
the team
guy.
may have been high on Lance.
The team was behind Lance. You were with, and it turned out that that's the way it was, because Lance
Yes.
actually went with the Niners 3rd. Do you think that if Lance did not go to the Niners, that Atlanta would have taken Lance?
I mean, I think that they would have considered it for sure. But I think that they, like most other teams in the NFL, knew that the 49ers were taking Lance.
Okay.
So they weren't really expecting it. But yeah, I mean, I think if he had been there, it sounds like he was their guy in terms of the quarterback they liked. I like Lance a lot. He was my number 3 quarterback. I still thought Fields was the prospect I would have preferred. So, I don't necessarily agree with that. But, I mean, I would have been fine with Lance there. But yeah, the Kyle Pitts selection, hard to be upset about it.
Yeah, and this is something that's really been overdue. the history of Matt Ryan and of course Tony Gonzalez and how important the tight end position has always been to Matt Ryan at the last few years. And look, a couple of years ago, finally it looked like they found their tight end, and then boom, he's gone. So and it's not that Hurst, he didn't really have a lot of time, and maybe he's still going to turn out to be a pretty good player. But still, wow! I mean, you get the opportunity to take a guy like Kyle Pitts, and really, what this does too is this means that Matt Ryan could very well be here for another 2 or 3 years. Correct?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's. I mean, I think you look at it from a couple of different angles. One is that obviously they didn't take a quarterback. They didn't even take a backup quarterback. Other than Felipe Franks, who I'm sure we'll talk about as an undrafted free agent. But yeah, I mean, they're in a situation now with Matt Ryan's contract and the fact that they restructured him to such an extent that his cap hit next year is almost 50 million, and that's not something that is going to carry over. Like, they're not going to carry a $50 million cap hit for one player. So he's going to get an extension next year, Matt Ryan. And, we'll see how they work it. They could do void years. They could do, a long-term extension. But I think 3 years is probably the minimum time that we're looking at Matt Ryan being here. And then we'll see how he plays from there. But, I think they're basically expecting Matt Ryan to be the starter until he's about 40, and then they'll probably evaluate their options at that point. But, we'll see. If they pick up extra ammunition from this Julio trade and that sort of thing, they could be in the quarterback market as soon as next year, just depending on how they finish and what sort of players are available when they're on the clock.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but I mentioned Darby, who was the final pick. So Darby now becomes an interesting player. So does the fact that we talked about some of the depth that the Falcons had in their arsenal, including the kid from Virginia. But Darby now, and this depth will, and obviously Pitts, because he's going to be on the field a lot with Hurst. This is going to be a receiving unit that is not going to just fall off because Julio Jones is gone. Calvin Ridley is a number one, and now you put in Pitts with all this other talent. This is why the Falcons probably felt that this was a reasonable time to trade Julio Jones, not just because they need the money, but because they have the depth. The passing game shouldn't really suffer that much.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think Arthur Smith feels like he needs these just dazzling weapons. Like, it would have been really fun to see the Falcons with this epic offense of Julio Jones and Kyle Pitts and Calvin Ridley and Hayden Hurst and like all these great players. It would have been a lot of fun. Was it necessary? No. I mean, I guess I probably more expected them to try to trade Julio next year when I think it was more financially advantageous. And I thought maybe they could get a better return from him if he was able to actually play a whole, season healthy. Because that's normally what he does. He doesn't really miss a lot of games. I know he's commonly had some injuries that have slowed him down, but I mean, other than this last year, he's, I think, missed like 1 or 2 games over the past 3 or 4 years. So he's not a guy that misses a lot of games. So it's a little bit earlier than I would have liked because, like, as much as I love Pitts, putting the Julio, targets on Pitts immediately, that's a lot to ask of any rookie, someone as good as Kyle Pitts. But, they do have Calvin Ridley, obviously. They still have Russell Gage, who I think is, a very good wide receiver 3. I don't know that you really want him to be your wide receiver 2, but, he stepped up in a big way when Julio went down, so he's certainly capable. They do have guys like you mentioned, Olamide Zaccheaus. He's certainly there. They have Frank Darby, who they apparently really like. Apparently, he's the funniest guy on the team now, according to Javian Hawkins, who we talked to last week. Apparently, he's just a lot of fun to be around, so I could see why the team might have liked his personality. And then they also signed Tajay Sharp, formerly of the Titans, most recently Vikings, who was with Arthur Smith for several years in Tennessee as a very capable wide receiver 4 type of guy. So they have depth. It's certainly not as imposing a wide receiver group without Julio. It's not as transcendent, but they certainly do have the players there to have a more than functional unit without Julio.
By the way, something first time I've ever had this, or had this option to reference this, but a quick quiz for our audience on this channel, and that is the fact that I was born in Jersey City, New Jersey, just like Frank Darby. So I think Frank's one of the only players I've ever. He might be the only NFL player born in Jersey City, New Jersey, as far as I know. But interesting that he made his way from Jersey City, New Jersey, all the way out to Arizona State.
Yeah.
And a career 19.4 average. So he's got the skills. He's more of a raw kind of product, though. But they've got the depth. He's going to be taken along a little slowly, but that's okay. Again, they have enough depth that maybe by 2022 he could step up and be an extra big part of the offense.
Yeah, yeah, and he missed a lot of time last year with injuries, which is why his stock was, I think, a lot lower going into this season. But yeah, a guy who's averaged 19.7 yards throughout his career, 8 touchdowns in 2019, over 600 yards on just 30 catches. So he's a big play threat. He's a guy that I like a lot, and the team seems to like him a lot too. So we'll see what kind of role he can carve out in Atlanta.
Let's stick on offense, and I want to ask you though about the one position on the team that was not looked at as far as drafting players, and that is running back. They signed Mike Davis. It's okay. Olason's back, but other than that, all they've done is sign two UDFAs. The big one is Javian Hawkins, and Hawkins had a 5th-round grade, so to get him out of the draft was a nice deal. I know you spoke to him on your podcast, and you could talk about that, but he had an extremely productive 2019, over 1,500 yards rushing, which was a Louisville school record, but, 30-year sophomore. So he's not, it's not like he's been around a long time experience-wise. He's a little diminutive guy. So he's not going to bounce off tackles. He's not an every down back, but that's why he was available after the draft. Yep. But this is still a guy that could carve a role out, and I'm sure Arthur Smith, Mr. Running Back Guru Offense, is going to find a role for him.
Yeah, he kind of fills a role that they didn't really have with the guys on the roster. They have Mike Davis, who I don't know if you saw the picture floating around of, his offseason conditioning, and his thighs, that are massive. So he's going to be, the physical.
This is his opportunity. He's like, man, I'm the number one running back again.
Yeah, so
actually, for the first time ever, right? I don't think Mike Davis has ever been a true number one. He had the chance in San Francisco, I believe, once or twice.
Yes,
but really,
he averaged over 5 yards per carry that year in San Francisco when he got the chance.
Yeah,
Kyle Shanahan, the running back whisperer. So he's capable of doing it. I don't think Carolina was necessarily the best showcase for his abilities because that offensive line was not great running the football, but he's going to be the guy that's going to carry the load and be the kind of every down back. He can catch the ball just fine. So he's the starter. What we've heard is that they plan to give Cordarrelle Patterson a fair number of carries as well as use him as a receiver. So he's probably going to be nominally the running back too. If you look at Patterson, it's interesting that, his measurables actually look a lot like Derrick Henry. Obviously he's not going to be Derrick Henry in Atlanta, but in terms of a really big, fast running back, that is very similar to what Cordarrelle Patterson is. By
the way, is he a running back now?
He is listed as a running back on the roster. We've been told he will be, used everywhere, but I think he will be a part of the running back room in terms of his position group. So, so that'll be interesting. That's certainly not something I expected. Obviously, getting him on special teams is a big boost too. So I like that. It seems like Quadri Olason's spot is fairly safe because, like you said, they didn't really bring in a lot of running back competition. It gets really interesting towards the bottom there where they have Javian Hawkins, who's kind of completely different than everybody else. He is the speedster, the dynamic option. The only other guys there are Tony Brooks James, who was signed as a futures guy by the previous regime. So I no offense to him, I think he's been a fine practice squad running back, but he wasn't really brought in by this group. So, I think he's got an uphill battle. And then Caleb Huntley, who is more similar to Ollison and those big bruising backs, he's got a chance certainly to beat out Ollison for one of those spots. But, Javian Hawkins, I think, is, the dynamic option that they don't have elsewhere. So I think he has a pretty clear path to the roster if he can capitalize on what he showed in college. And like you said, he as a smaller back, he's not a guy that's going to be a 20 carry a game guy, but as a 5 to 10 carries, a guy that can get you some big plays after teams have been worn down by Mike Davis and Cordarrelle Patterson and 12 personnel with Kyle Pitts and Hayden Hurst getting thrown all over and the field's all spread out. That type of one cut and go fast back can get a lot of production in that role. So I'm excited to see what he brings.
And by the way, you mentioned Huntley, who was a 4-year player for Ball State. Matter of fact, he had one of his 2,000-yard plus seasons as a freshman. Best year was as a junior statistically. But again, a little bit different type of a runner than Hawkins, somebody that more than likely makes the practice squad if he can actually hang on with the team. So taking a look. Oh, by the way, are there Falcon fans that are saying, well, what's the difference between like this Hawkins kid and what we had previously with Ito Smith?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there are people asking that. I mean, I think Ito Smith had very good vision and was more of an elusive back, whereas Hawkins is more of a speedster, probably. Hawkins certainly has that elusiveness to his game, but I think Ito Smith was kind of a more well-rounded back, whereas Hawkins is a little bit more dynamic. But yeah, I mean, I think that's fair. I don't think any of us really expected Ito to get cut, so that was a surprising move. But it seems like Hawkins is being brought in to kind of fill the role that Ito Smith previously had.
Yeah, well, and it wasn't like Ito wasn't making a whole lot of money, but it was still more than what Hawkins would make. So
yeah,
you got to save wherever you can save. Okay, let's go back to the draft players, and we'll talk about the offensive line. I mentioned Mayfield, who could very well have went in the late first round, and nobody would have blinked. But he goes to Atlanta in round 3, and so I got to ask you, even though he was a tackle at Michigan, and we talked about the one aspect of the Falcons' offensive line, the hole. It was left guard. Will Jalen Mayfield be looked at during training camp as a definite option to try and win that job this season?
Yeah, I mean, I would think that they're expecting him to win it. You never know with these mid-round, well, not really mid-round, like day 2 guys. I think that they would like him to win left guard, and I think they drafted him with that in mind. But I don't think they're going to necessarily force him to play there. I think they're going to have him feature prominently in that competition at left guard. He doesn't really have a lot of, dominant competition to beat out. I think Matt Gono is a guy who's better at tackle. So I think he's probably the favorite to be swing tackle over someone like Mayfield. But I would think that they would probably, Mayfield is a guy who's a really great run blocker, struggled a little bit in pass pro. Doesn't have a ton of starts to his name. He didn't have a very long college career, but in terms of his physicality, his size, and his ability, I think that they want him at left guard. They want to get him reps as soon as possible, and they probably feel like that's the best way for him to get acclimated as quickly as he can.
And by the way, anybody that wants to talk about players that opt out and players that don't, well, Jalen Mayfield originally opted out. Then, all right, I'm going to play. Then 2 games later, injures his ankle. And who knows? Maybe he's a first-round draft pick. So don't blame these kids when they opt out. So, because there's always potential for that. Okay, well, can Drew Dahlman, the 4th-round center, can he also battle for that left guard spot? Because I really like this pick. This is a perfect area to draft a guy like Dahlman. But I think he's going to have a long career in the NFL. The only thing is, Hennessy was sitting there, and this is a perfectly good long-term center, you would think. So one thing has got to fall out of this picture here. So does that mean it's going to be Mayfield and Dahlman and Hennessy all battling it out for the left guard center spots? Well, Mayfield not going to play center, but Dahlman or Hennessy?
I mean, yeah, I think it's going to be Dahlman and Hennessy really competing at center. I think Hennessy is a guy who can play guard too. He doesn't have necessarily the same size concerns as Dahlman, but Dahlman's sub 300. So I have a hard time thinking Dahlman's really going to play at left guard unless he bulks up a lot. And part of the reason you like him is because he's so athletic, so agile. So you don't necessarily want him to put on too much weight. But I think it's going to be a really good battle between Hennessy and Dahlman at center. I would put my money on Hennessy just because he's had a year in the NFL. Both of those guys are good center prospects, so I think they're both certainly capable of doing it. I definitely feel a lot better about center in general with both of them on the roster because before they had no backup center like that you would want to ever play. So to have both of them there, one of them is going to be able to be the backup, to be your depth piece, your primary interior backup. So I feel very comfortable now with that guy in place as opposed to not having any really experienced centers on the roster. otherwise. So
were you surprised that they chose Dahlman based on the fact that they had Hennessy? Because what it's telling me is, I mean, fourth round is still a player within a year you want starting or contributing at a pretty high level. You don't want your fourth round guy to be a backup. You want your guy who, that's the worst case scenario, but you want that guy to start or be a major contributor. So do you look at this as, okay, maybe they want Dahlman to start and to move Hennessy to guard, and then eventually Mayfield to tackle? I mean, what is the long term, say 2 to 3 years down the road? What do you think they're visioning here?
yeah, I mean, I think they knew they needed another center. They didn't necessarily need to replace Hennessy, but they needed another center one way or the other. And I think they looked at the board and thought Dahlman was simply the best player
Okay.
there.
Okay.
And they certainly could use the competition at left guard too in case nobody else shakes out. But I think they knew they needed another center. The cheapest way to get one is probably to draft someone,
Yeah.
as opposed to signing a veteran. So,
Okay.
I think they would be happy with either Dahlman or Hennessy starting this year. But as a fourth round pick, obviously you'd like them to start. But if they can be your primary interior backup and just be a reliable guy, because injuries happen that can
Absolutely.
step in. I think you'll be fine with that too, because I'm sure we'll see Dahlman play at some point. Whether it's injury or getting moved around or players coming and going. But yeah, I think they just thought he was a good value there, and they liked him a lot, and they needed another center, whether Hennessy starts or not. So
And the other thing too is we talked about McGarry, because there was a lot of talk before the draft about, Atlanta, this would be a great spot for Sewell. Nobody was giving McGarry an opportunity as a first round draft pick. And we also talked about how the change to more of a zone blocking scheme would be maybe a better fit for McGarry. He wasn't exactly healthy so far in his career, so you got to give him a chance. He's too talented. But let's just say he doesn't work out for whatever reason. Then this is another good reason to have Dahlman there, because if you have to, as long as they look like they're starting material, you could move Dahlman to center, you could move Hennessy to left guard, and you could start Jalen Mayfield at right tackle.
yeah, and Matt Gono is certainly going to factor in there too. I think that Gono is a better tackle prospect. He's always looked much better at tackle
Okay.
than he has at guard. I think he's just more comfortable there. So I wouldn't count out Caleb McGarry at all. I think that I think this is a scheme that's going to not require so much of anyone as a pass blocker. I think Arthur Smith is going to have this offensive line run blocking a lot, even when it's a pass play, because it's going to be a lot of play action. They're not going to be requiring all these long pass sets, all these pure pass blocking reps like Dirk Cutter was doing. So I think it's going to take a lot of the pressure off these guys to be these elite level pass protectors and just kind of let them go and hit. And that was what Caleb McGarry was really best at in college, was just going and hitting people. And the same with Mayfield and a lot of these guys. So I think the emphasis on let's get these guys run blocking, let's get the run scheme back where it is, and we're going to build a play action heavy, quick pass, intermediate pass game off of that, instead of asking these guys to pass block for 3-5 seconds, every play, is going to just naturally help a lot. And I think that'll help McGarry too. He's certainly talented enough. I don't really have any question that McGarry will be fine, but I think if he falters or if there is an injury, they do have Matt Gono, who they like a lot. And I think he's capable of being a starting tackle as well.
All right, now let's go to defense. And the first, actually, if you look at it, this is not a surprise. The worst pass defensive team in the league goes out and adds 3 DBs in their draft class. But what I find interesting about all 3 of them is that I don't think any of them are 6 feet. I think they're all under 6 feet.
Yeah, like Richie Grant is like right there.
Right there. Yeah,
like
5'11", yeah.
4'8", or something like that. Yeah.
But the more important thing is they all look like they're versatile and can play the slot. And they're all very good tacklers. So Richie Grant went first, who's also capable of, again, playing multiple positions, as I mentioned. And then you have Darren Hall, who was the 4th round draft pick, who played on a very good defensive Aztec squad as a 3-year starter. And then you have the 5th round pick, Avery Williams from Boise State, who I remember after he had like a really good freshman season. And everybody was talking about Avery Williams being like a future 1st round draft pick. But whatever the case may be, he's got the capability, again, of playing slot, but he also is extremely good at returning kicks. Both punt and kick return, is also a very good kick coverage kid. all three guys actually could be added to that special teams unit. So talk about how you vision these three DBs working out for the Falcons defense, because I imagine they're all going to contribute.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the big things we saw with Dean Pease and the guys he added this offseason in free agency as well was we want versatile safeties in particular. So they went out and added Duron Harmon and Eric Harris, both guys that have played in the box and deep and cover two and in all these versatile roles. So either one of those guys can move around and play whatever slot because Dean Pease is going to blitz. He's going to blitz from all over. He's going to disguise his coverage. He's going to ask his safeties to rotate on every snap. And like you said, the guys that they added in the draft match that as well. Richie Grant is another guy who's versatile, capable of playing single high, playing in the box, and playing cover two looks. So he fits right in with that group. I think they're going to mix and match these guys a lot. I think Grant and Duron Harmon are probably the two safeties that are going to get the most reps. But Eric Harris, big guy that played free safety, single high for the Raiders last year. Not that I think that's his best role, but he's capable of doing it and not being, a disaster. I think Harris will take some box reps. Grant will take some box reps and single high reps, and Harmon will probably take some versatile reps as well. So they've got, I think, a very interesting three safety tandem, which is completely remade from last year. Other than Jalen Hawkins, the safety group is completely different. And then at corner, they added Fabian Moreau in free agency, who apparently was getting the starting outside reps across from A.J. Terrell. So it looks like they want him to be an outside corner in this system, which is what he has been best at in his career, even though Washington tried to kind of pigeonhole him into the slot. That didn't really work. He's been a much better outside corner, so it seems like the Falcons have wisely made that decision. But Darren Hall, another guy who's versatile, has played inside and outside. I think he's going to be one of the primary depth guys for the outside job. Could possibly factor into the slot competition with someone like Isaiah Oliver. And then Darren Hall, another guy, I didn't watch him, but I know Eric Robinson over at the Falcoholic really liked his tape. And I know Hall was kind of a riser throughout the process, so it doesn't shock me that he ended up going in the fourth round. And then Avery Williams, I think they took him for his special teams acumen, but I think he'll factor in for the slot competition. And he's a guy who's done a lot with the ball. I think he's had 8, 9 pass deflections. Something. So he's certainly capable of getting his hand on the football. 4 interceptions as well. Slot only guy because of his size, but still, someone who's capable. And his special teams is what's going to put him on the roster this year, probably. They don't they signed Cordarrelle Patterson. As Patterson's a kick returner only. He doesn't really return punts, which is surprising probably to a lot of people. But they still have Chris Rowland from last year, who's going to factor into that competition. But Avery Williams, offers some defensive ability. They said they might even consider some offensive play packages for him because he is just really dangerous with the ball in his hands. A guy who averaged, I think, over 15 yards per punt return, 6 punt return touchdowns. 3, I think, kick return touchdowns in his career. So a very, very dangerous returner. So I'm interested to see, if he ends up winning that competition. I kind of expect that he will. But yeah, just the name of the game, versatility with all of these secondary players.
And so you think that opening day, more than likely, it's Patterson as the primary kick returner and Avery Williams as the primary punt returner?
Yeah. I wouldn't be shocked if Rowland manages to stick around too, just because he's a good player. But it's going to be a tough competition because both those guys are very good returners. And Rowland didn't really break in last year. I kind of blame the Falcons coaching staff for keeping players that weren't really very good at returning out there ahead of him. But we'll see. I think Williams is this coaching staff's pick, so I think he probably has the leg up because of that. But we'll see.
All right. And by the way, A.J. Terrell is there, which is important.
Yes.
Because he
has to be the corner one. Yeah.
Every secondary needs the number one guy. And that first to second year switch is hopefully going to turn on for A.J., especially with
fine,
Pease.
Honestly. Yeah, he was fine last year. I'm not really concerned about Terrell. He was on arguably the worst pass defense in the league and looked mostly fine. So I think, even some just level of competence around him will help a lot. So.
Also, the team signed Marcus Murphy from Mississippi State. More of a raw developmental guy you could definitely see on the practice squad to start his career, but a player that definitely had a draftable grade.
Yeah. I mean, I think they like Murphy. Like certainly have room for safeties on the practice squad. So I wouldn't be shocked at all if he's one of the first players to get a look there.
Okay, as far as the rest of the draft, there were two more defenders, two more players to talk about, both in the fifth round. They were defensive linemen. The one from Notre Dame, who was just 1 year starter, so he has. But what I noticed between, what is it, Ogundeji?
Yeah, Ogundiji, Adeto come.
Ogundiji.
Yeah,
All right,
Ogundiji
that'll
or
work.
Ogundiji, I'm not sure. Yeah.
Okay, we'll figure it out. And Graham, Taquan Graham from Texas, who I like. I actually like Graham because he's got that freakish body, and both guys are also capable of being inside outside kind of defenders. Again, the versatility that Dean Pease is looking for, but I kind of like Graham. Graham's a guy that just needs to maybe be more productive, but
Mhm.
with that body and the strength, and now he's in the NFL playing along some really good players that maybe that'll boost his options to get more production. But I think he's got. I think between the two players, I definitely like him the most. But what do you think as far as both guys? Will they both make the roster?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because they have so many defensive tackles now. They have just a lot of guys, and you think the draft pick is going to have the leg up, and I think he will. But yeah, I mean, it looks like with how many players they have, kind of on the defensive line, the Falcons are going to keep 10 or more defensive linemen this year and just rotate and rush a lot of guys. But Taquan Graham, like you said, crazy measurements, at 292 pounds, ran a like under a 4.9 40 with a 1.67 10-yard split, which is absurd. Just explosive, big, and raw. So we'll see. What I think that a lot of these defensive tackles are going to play. That kind of 3-4 defensive end role. They'll rotate in. Graham's a guy that can play some outside reps too if they need a big end. But I like him a lot. I think he's got a spot more than likely. And then Ogundiji, they just need quality edge guys. They have, they're really banking on Dante Fowler being something this year. So hopefully that would help. But Ogundiji, good size, explosive, pretty good speed. Just another guy with good measurables that they're looking to kind of step up and play a versatile role for them. He's taken snaps inside, outside, stand up, hand in the dirt. And again, that's DNP's defense. They're going to ask these guys to do a lot. They're going to stand up. They're going to rush you from the edge. They're going to rush you from interior gaps. You're going to have to play a number of positions and be able to move around and stand up from time to time in DMP's defense, because this is not a traditional, we're going to play like Dan Quinn. It's 4-3 under. We're lining up four guys on the line and we're rushing four every snap.
Yeah.
Pease is going to blitz. He's going to blitz defensive linemen. He's going to blitz linebackers. He's going to blitz safeties and corners and everything. And every play is going to look a little bit different. So he's really built and filled out the roster with guys that can fill multiple roles on the defensive line.
Were you surprised that, knowing though from what he's done in the past, that it seems to me, just taking a look, besides Fowler right now looks like the only guy on the up front that could be more of a stand-up, in a 3-4. This is still looking like, though, more of a 4-3 defense, especially now, like just adding more defensive linemen than actual edge rushers. Were you surprised that was the case, or is that just, hey, you know what, you got to run the defense that maybe your roster dictates, especially early on?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be very multiple, and it may have more 4-3 looks than 3-4. I don't think Dean Pease really much cares. I think he's just going to line up in the way that he thinks is best. But yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the guys that are carryovers from previous years are capable of standing up. Guys like Jacob Tuati-Mariner, John Kaminsky, who was playing on the interior. He is a total freak athlete, even bigger even than Taquan Graham was coming out. So I think he's certainly capable of standing up and playing edge, even though he's 280 pounds. So I think he'll get more opportunities to be an edge defender in this defense. They signed Barkevious Mingo, who has experience doing both as well. Ogundiji also. And then, we'll see in terms of the interior guys, a lot of them are going to play more of a 3-4 defensive end role versus just a 4-3 defensive tackle. But guys like Marlon Davidson, who played edge at Auburn as well, He's going to get maybe some chances to rush off the edge from time to time. We mentioned Taquan Graham as a guy who is versatile as well. They brought in Jonathan Bullard in free agency, who's a traditional 3-4 defensive end who's played defensive tackle as well. So they have a lot of guys that can do a lot of things. The only thing they didn't really bring in was a more traditional 3-4 nose tackle. They still have Tyler Davidson, who is a good nose tackle in a 4-3, maybe a little undersized for 3-4 looks. But I think they signed somebody off of somebody's practice squad. I can't remember his name now, but a more traditional, I think it was Olive Sagapolu, who is a more traditional 3-4 nose tackle. So I think he'll probably be a practice squad guy this year that maybe gets a chance to kind of take over for Davison next year if they like what they see from him.
And the only linebacker that was added actually came from after the draft, where they took Errol Thompson. Thompson had a draftable grade, a 3-year starter out of Mississippi State, and more of a old school middle linebacker, more than likely just going to be a 2-down type of guy. Who knows whether or not he'll make the roster, but this is a team that doesn't have a lot of guys like Thompson.
Yeah. I mean, I think he will make the roster just because they didn't really add any linebackers. They added Brandon Copeland in free agency, who's also kind of a linebacker edge hybrid.
Yeah.
He's played both, so he's kind of more of that veteran guy that will be the primary backup there. Their top 3 linebackers were all pretty good, so they didn't necessarily need to invest a lot. They got Deion Jones, Foye Oluokun, and Michael Walker, all guys that played well last year. So it's not surprising that they kind of chose to kind of let this position add a veteran and then kind of see how it shook out in undrafted free agency. But I think in Errol Thompson, they got their thumper, their rundown guy that if they, want to put in some size for goal line or size for third and short. Thompson's not necessarily someone you want running downfield in coverage ever, but I believe the quote I heard was he would stick his head in a beehive if he thought it would win the game for his team. So, I like the sound of that. I think we're going to have him on the show to talk to him either this week or next week too. So I'm excited to get a little bit more of a view of him. But yeah, I think that he has a very good shot to make the roster simply because, it's wide open for him.
All right. And then finally, I wanted to talk to you about the other player that they signed after the draft that you mentioned before, Felipe Franks, because since they did not add a quarterback early or late in the draft, they did add Franks. And I thought this was a very smart signing because Franks could have easily been drafted as high as the 5th round. He had 4 years of starting experience in the SEC, 3 with Florida. Now, I know watching him, he was very inconsistent. There was just no doubt about it. I was never a big Franks fan. But you had undeniable arm strength. And he's just a massive guy. I mean, his size is, 6'6", 234. I mean, that's just
almost
huge.
6'6", yeah.
Yeah, that is huge. And he checks all the boxes, height, weight, length that you're looking for. So there's so much to work with, and there's no rush. He wasn't drafted anyway. He's really a perfect signing. He's a guy that you could just get him some time for a couple of years, maybe get his confidence going as well, which is something that he needs. If he can get some confidence, a little bit more knowledge about how to read coverages and things of that nature, then you never know a few years down the road.
Yeah, no, I think it was perfect. And I think they were smart to just wait and see who shook out in undrafted free agency as opposed to spending a higher pick on a guy. I don't know. I mean, Kyle Trask in the 2nd round, I can't get behind that pick because look, I mean, Kyle Trask could probably start for you tomorrow and be someone who could, be functional in your offense and not make a ton of mistakes, but he's never going to be a high-end starter. Felipe Franks is a guy you probably wouldn't want to start anytime soon, but he has the chance to be a starter because of his tools. I mean, he's incredibly toolsy. It's like you think about it and it's like, is Felipe Franks' tape any worse than Josh Allen's college tape? I mean, Josh Allen's college tape was a disaster, and they obviously the Bills made that pick work. Sure. And made all the nerds eat their words. But that's the type of player I would love to take as an undrafted free agent instead of a first rounder. So elite athlete, obviously offers some dual threat ability, great arm. His teammates all seem to really love him. He's got a tremendous opportunity in Atlanta. He only has to beat out A.J. McCarron for the backup role, and that seems kind of far-fetched. The Falcons probably more comfortable with someone like McCarron as the backup.
Yeah.
But Franks could easily easily make the practice squad. He doesn't have any other competition at all. So I think they would want to stash him on the practice squad. I don't know if it would feel like he would get stolen away there or not. Probably depends on how he plays in the preseason, but you can protect a player on the practice squad now, so they could keep him there for a while and see how that shakes out. And I think long term, he's got as good of a chance to develop as anyone. I think he has a much better chance to develop into something than like Ian Book, who the Saints drafted in the 4th round. So I just I'll never understand that pick, but much rather have Franks as an undrafted free agent. Thank you.
Well, I think I'm just guessing that when you draft a guy like Ian Book, you're going, okay, he's going to be our long-term backup, somebody that we feel that can comfortably come in for a game or two every year if we need him to, and he won't lose games for us. That's all I can, because I'm agreeing with you. I mean, he's not going to be a starter in the NFL. He just doesn't have starting caliber talent, but that's the whole thing with Franks. Look, like I said, I didn't think anything highly of Franks in college, but that's because he's not a finished product. But that's why he needs a few years. And we're not trying to sit here and say he's going to be a starter, but look, he wasn't a draft pick. You roll the dice and you see what you got. So
yeah, I think it was someone said it best. It was like, of all these quarterbacks, Franks maybe has a 1% chance of turning into a high-end starter, where a lot of these guys don't even have a 1% chance of turning into a high-end starter. He also has probably an 80% chance of doing nothing, and some of these other guys probably have a 50% of being at least a baseline backup. And so Franks has a lot longer to climb to get to that point, but his high ceiling is way up there opposed to some of these other guys. So that's the perfect guy to take a shot on as an undrafted free agent.
All right. So you've got now, what is your show? How is it daily?
It's Wednesdays at 8:10 p.m. Eastern. We're doing that every Wednesday, and that's live on YouTube. So
okay. And who's your guest this week?
We don't have it firmly set. It may be Errol Thompson, the linebacker you spoke of. We're still talking with him because OTAs are actively going on. So I think players are obviously very busy. So we'll see. But either way, we're going to have my co-host Eric Robinson and our director of guest personnel Evan Birchfield. Where those guys are there every week with me, and we usually get someone from Falcons Media Nation as well. Last week we had Tori McElhaney of The Athletic. We're working on getting Michael Rothstein from ESPN to come on soon when he has a chance as well. So,
Evan, great job as always. We'll talk to you again right around training camp, and either just before or during, and it can't come soon enough.
Yep.
Right?
Just happy that we're actually going to have stuff to talk about this year instead of everything being shut down. So,
and fans in the stands and all that.
Yep.
Who would have thought? So can't wait. Yeah. All right, Kevin. Appreciate it as always. We'll talk to you soon.
Absolutely. Thanks.